As many competitive advantages of the past have become commoditized. You can no longer control information or geography, whatever. There's what's left is the one thing that can't be commoditized, which is human creativity. And to me, I believe that cultivating that organization-wide is the ultimate competitive advantage.
Welcome to Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host, Dr. Cynthia. With over 30 years in the corporate world as a single mom, cancer survivor, and often the only woman in the C-suite, I understand the balancing act high-achieving women face. Now an executive coach and international speaker, my mission is to embolden every woman in the C-suite or on the rise to claim her agency and challenge the norms holding her back. Tailored for ambitious professional women, this show features candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. If you're ready to look up and step up, you're in the right place. Join us and invest in your future today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I am your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest. We have known each other from a distance. We share some common friends, but it is really a distinct honor and privilege to welcome Josh Linkner. Josh is a two times New York Times bestselling author, a serial entrepreneur, venture capital investor, professional jazz guitarist, and a globally recognized innovation expert. He has been changing lives around the globe and is on a mission to help leaders find a way through creative problem solving, innovative thinking, and ingenuity. All the things we could all use a lot more of. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thank you so much. Truly, it's an honor to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start with um, one of the things that we think a lot about is this idea that automation and technology are going to take all of our jobs and nobody's going to have any work to do. But it strikes me that there's this sort of intersection when you talk about innovation and creativity. What is your point of view around that and how that lines up around the human side?
Well, first of all, spoiler alert, AI and technology will not take all of our jobs. By the way, people said the same thing about the printing press, the telephone, the personal computer, and those did disrupt some jobs and required some new skills to be developed, of course, but they also unlock, massive potential and value creation and good in the world. So I don't think that we're doomed. I'm an optimist about this.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I mean, there are some things that AI can do incredibly well. I love it, awesome. And there are some things that AI can and never will be able to do. And so I think it's an invitation for us all to actually step into our humanity. If there's
Mm,
something that's automated and boring and, like, great, let AI do that so we can be more human.
right.
The goal isn't to out AI, it's out human it, and so in that case, the things that it can do is empathy and compassion and kindness and extracting meaning and creating art. And so
Mm,
those are things that I think the next generation in the workforce and probably even in our personal lives is going to be much more centered around us being an artist, being a contributor, being a net new creator, rather than following some checklist or system, because AI can do that better. But the good news
yeah.
is there's a bright future for us all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I love outhuman it. I think that makes so much sense. Um, One of the things that you talk about is how creativity is a powerful competitive advantage, and that specifically how intentionally cultivating that creativity as a leadership trait and talent and gift. When you're advising leaders around the globe, talk a little bit more about how that shows up.
Yeah, and just real quickly before I forget, back on the AI thing, I've long thought about what's the right analogy for this, and it finally hit me. That is Star Trek. So I wasn't like a Trekkie or anything, but I know there was Captain Kirk and
Yeah.
Spock. And Captain Kirk was like this deeply human, a little bit emotional at times, and Spock was logical. And so think of Captain Kirk as humans and Spock as AI. And it's a good frame because the show is successful, both, their episodes on the screen and the show itself, because of the interplay between the two of them. In other words, if there were two Kirks or two Spocks, it wouldn't have worked. And so
Right.
again, just reinforcing, I think there's plenty of opportunity for us. All right, back to your
Yeah.
question. As many competitive advantages of the past have become commoditized. You can no longer control information or geography, whatever. There's what's left is the one thing that can't be commoditized, which is human creativity. And to me, I believe that cultivating that organization wide is the ultimate competitive advantage. The words like innovation, they can be overwhelming. And you imagine somebody in a lab coat or a hoodie, maybe, but it doesn't just apply to that. It could be for every box in every org chart, in every role in every org chart, in an organization. And so I think the trick isn't so much like getting more people to invent a new product, but getting the people in finance to be more creative. Not like
Mm.
maliciously creative, of course, but
Right,
like
right.
attracting understanding through the finance, how do we drive more revenue, etc. People in legal, people in customer service, and so I think there's room to inject this capability in all organizations system wide. And that becomes the ultimate competitive advantage, especially in times of volatility and change and uncertainty. The thing is this, like I often make the analogy because I'm a jazz musician. Many of us got to a point in our career of success by being good, what I would call classical musician business people. In other words, what do? You follow the checklist, you do the protocol, you rely on your training, you adhere to the systems, all that. And to me, that's what classical musicians do. They play the notes exactly as Mozart intended. The
Mhm.
problem is that we don't have that luxury anymore. The world is too dynamic, too fluid, too volatile. In other words, we have to perform at our best without the notes in front of us. We got to play some jazz. So my
Right.
invitation to those listening, whether or not you like listening to jazz, is a different story, but is stepping into that which is more dynamic and fluid and adaptive and improvisational. And I think those capabilities, which by the way we all have, that we're built for it as human beings, if we can cultivate those, that becomes a competitive advantage not only organizationally but individually.
Yeah. Oh, I love that because it gets into that whole agility piece too, right? It's that, yes, you can follow a very structured process. And I think the industrial era, that made a lot of sense. You pick the widget and you put the widget here, and everything was really prescriptive. Now that technology is going to be, and already does, do a lot of those really systemic or system oriented things, the people now get to elevate how we show up. I love that. So how does the person listening lean into that creativity? Because you said it's in all of us. So the person listening that's going, I don't know, I don't feel very agile.
Well, I love what you just said there, just to hit that again, elevate. And
Yeah.
so AI doesn't replace, it actually challenges us to elevate. And if
Right.
we're doing some tasks that are rote and methodical, yeah, wouldn't you rather have AI do that? Not so you
Mm,
don't have a job, but to free up your time to do even more important, more meaningful, more human type work.
right.
The question is, how do we do that? Here's the thing. When you and me and everybody on this call was 6 years old, every one of us was an artist, weren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been said that kids enter kindergarten with a full set of colorful crayons and graduate high school with a single blue ballpoint pen.
Mhm.
It's not teachers' fault, by the way. Teachers are heroes. But we live in
Sure.
an outdated system that instead of nurturing this natural capability that all humans have, it tends to tap it down. And I've been researching human creativity now for a couple of decades, and the research could not be more clear. It's not an opinion. It's hard fact that human beings are hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state, that we're built for it. If you're breathing, you're creative. The
Mhm.
challenge that many people have is that they were told they weren't, because we often equate creativity to very specific, narrow things. Oh, do you paint? Do you dance? Do you play guitar? Yeah, those could be creative, but so could just like everything else on the planet. You could be a creative parent, you could be a creative at lawn care, you could be creative at customer service or sales or anywhere in between. The thing is that we often think that those are non-creative activities and only a very limited set of things are creative activities. So I think we should first of all dispel that myth that there's room for creativity in everything that we do in life.
Mm.
Second of all, if we're built to be a creative force, why can't we tap into that? And it doesn't, you have to be good at all of it. Like I play jazz guitar pretty well. I cannot draw a stick figure if I try. Like I'm a terrible visual artist. Terrible. I'm the worst dancer. Like I'm dating myself, but I remember ever watched Seinfeld and Elaine was a
Yes.
terrible dancer. I'm
Yeah.
worse than she is at dancing. But doesn't mean I'm not creative. And so the
Right.
point I think is that each of us is not trying to learn a new, like, oh, I need to learn to paint. It's finding areas to employ your own creativity in your own way, in your own role. And that's a much easier lift. We can get our arms around that better. And like most things in life, once you kind of have that identity shift, then it's like just doing some reps and start small. My most recent book was called Big Little Breakthroughs: How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Result. And I try to really demyth this notion of, oh, you have to have $1 billion idea or it doesn't count. Or like, unless you're inventing penicillin, it's not innovative. Nonsense.
Mm.
The best innovators actually do the opposite, which is cultivate these little micro innovations on a high frequency basis. So if someone says, I want to learn to be creative, don't try to like paint the Mona Lisa while I'm curing cancer. Instead, like look for a teeny little drop that you can do in your next meeting,
Mm,
and just look for the little drops. And over time, your capacity will grow.
yes. Josh, I love that so much. One of the things that you and I share in terms of philosophically is this notion of natural talent and abilities, and every single person has natural gifts and talents. For what I always say is it's talent for what? Figuring that out. But it's provocative to me because I, like so many that you studied and you speak to, think of creativity in sort of a narrow box, and your point is really resonates because I can't draw either. I have this one little dog that my kids always roll their eyes because it's the one thing I can draw. It's like 3 humps and, a tail. But, but there are places where creative about solving a business problem or creative about thinking how to meet a customer's unique issue. I mean, my mind is kind of racing with ways in which people are creative in lots of ways that don't fall into that which is easy to observe or hear, right? We see it show up in entertainment, we see it, acting, sports, etcetera. That's where people see talent. And then suddenly when we get into business, it becomes very myopic in terms of, well, if you don't do this, you're not that thing. That is so profound.
Well, thank you, and I totally agree. You framed it. You hit it exactly right. And by the way, I've interviewed incredible business leaders, like people who started companies and created billions of dollars of wealth. And I'm like, well, when was the moment you knew you were creative? They're like, well, I'm not creative. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You just built this company and created 10,000 jobs. Like, oh no, I'm not creative. I'm like, why do you say that? Well, because my third grade violin teacher said I can't play violin. My mind is blown by that. What are you talking about? And so, like, I'll
Yeah.
give you an example: sales. Sales is one of the most creative fields on the planet. That's absolutely as creative as playing an instrument or painting. Absolutely. Because what is sales? You're dynamically responding. You're using the art of persuasion. It's not just rattling off features and benefits. If not, they could order from your website. But it's the notion of transference of belief. You're adapting. You're reframing. You're changing. Like that is 100. Like that's a wildly creative thing. Now we don't often call it that, which is a
Right.
shame. But doesn't mean it isn't that. And so I love it when we can discover the creativity that already exists. It's just maybe hiding a little bit beneath the surface.
Yeah. What is your definition of creativity? I assume that you have sort of a thought around how do you define it because you're expanding my mind in terms of how I think about it.
Yeah, and there's lots of different definitions, but the way I think about it is imagination, creativity, innovation. So
Ah,
imagination is just imagining anything at all that is not that is novel. In other words, it doesn't yet exist. So I could imagine painting your car purple. The problem, so nothing wrong with that. That's this raw imagination is something that doesn't yet exist. You can imagine. Incidentally, we can all imagine anything. Like there's nobody on the planet that can't imagine. If I
mm,
said, just imagine an elephant on the moon. Does an elephant ever been on the moon? No. Can you vision it in your mind? Yes. Oh, good news. You're creative. Like that's just it. So that's the basis of it. And that does require creativity, but it's just the baseline. Then you move
sure.
up to creativity. To me, creativity has some inherent artistic value. It doesn't have to be commercial value. So if I painted your car purple, it would be horrible. It would have imagination, but no creativity.
Mm,
If Banksy painted your car purple, it would probably be a lot better. So I might elevate that to creativity because there's some inherent quality or artistic value. It doesn't have to be commercial, but it's not just me being sloppy.
right.
Then you go up one layer on top of that would be innovation, which is essentially creativity that has utility. It has both artistic integrity and utility. So if playing with our silly example here, if it was like, well, I like the idea of painting cars so much that I developed a paint color changing technology where you could push a button each morning on your dashboard and choose what color you wanted your car, people would pay for that, and that would be something that's innovative. So I just think about that: imagination, creativity, innovation.
Yeah, I think that's a great way. So, for the person listening, this is such a moment to think about where that shows up for you and not limit yourself to these historical beliefs. And I love your example about we sort of um, take out of our young children. I have 3 little grandchildren, and they're they are creative and innovative, and there's no limits because they haven't been had all those things quite stifled down. And I agree that it's not at the feet of teachers, it's society in general, right? Stay in your lane and do the thing. um which is so fascinating to me. Now, you have a framework that you talk about, which is I mentioned in your bio, the find a way. Is that then the doing this part of pulling out your own creativity?
Yeah, I've written, in all 4 of my books, over the last many, many years, essentially, how do you do this? Like, how do you tap into that? How do you unlock that inherent skill and bring that dormant creative capacity to the world? And
Mm,
it's actually a double benefit. I mean, it's there's nothing more intrinsically rewarding on this planet than the expression of human creativity. We're meant to do it. We think about times when you've laughed hysterically in a great conversation like that. That's the expression of creativity. You're not reading from a script. You're in that creative zone. And so there's deep inherent beauty, but there's also professional benefit. The more who's going to get the promotion, the follow the rules, heads down, do what they're told, or the person that's going to generate inventive thinking and creative problem solving on a daily basis. Who's going to win the new customer? Who's going to get the investor? And so the nice thing about it is there's intrinsic internal reward, and there's also real utility in
mm.
stepping into this version of ourselves.
Yeah. What kind of pushback or resistance have you heard from leaders as you talk about creativity and innovation and how it's in all of us? I'm curious about that thing you have to overcome with the maybe traditional mindset.
Where sometimes people go is an edge case. Well, if I have everybody being all creative, they're going to paint all over the walls. No one's going to do their job. We're going to miss every deadline. I'm like, no, you're not. You hired people for their good judgment. Let them use their good judgment. I'm not
Yeah.
saying throw judgment to the wind and be irresponsible. Of course not. But I'm saying as you work to do the work, solve problems, seize opportunities, apply creativity is an enabler to the outcomes that you crave, not to distract from the goal. Of course not. So that's one thing. But the biggest blocker of this type of approach is fear, not
Mm,
natural talent, fear. Fear is the single biggest blocker of creative output. And simply put, fear and creativity cannot coexist. So if you are in a hijacked state and you're afraid and, oh my God, what's my boss going to say? And I might lose my job, you just cannot be creative. It's not your fault. I can't either. Nobody can. And so the trick for leaders essentially is to set the conditions and create an environment where fear goes out of the room. Create, I mean, psychological safety is a bit overused at this point, but create an environment that feels safe, where there's trust and
mhm.
respect, where people can share ideas without fear of retribution, and people will naturally get creative. That's the good news. You're not teaching somebody a new skill; you're unlocking an existing one. Maybe it's got some cobwebs, it needs a little dormant, but we
Yeah.
can reactivate it. But the way to do that is set the conditions and get fear out of the way.
Yeah. I'm gonna tie this back to one of my frameworks, which is the 7-minute pivot, just to sort of create a bridge because and I'd be interested in your feedback about this. So 7-minute pivot very quickly is you set a 7-minute timer. You get out a paper and pen, remove distractions, and you ask yourself a prompt. So the prompt that's coming to my mind for the person listening is um, where am I creative beyond the traditional definition, right? And you spend 7 minutes and you're just journaling the things and you ask yourself why, right? Get underneath the thing. And then you end that with one small thing to your point about it's incremental, not go reinvent, world hunger and all the things or solve it. But one small thing you can do today to move slightly forward. And so that it occurs to me that that could be useful both in uncovering your creativity if you're sort of stuck with, I just never thought of myself as a creative person, or to tackle fear. What am I afraid of about showing up that way? And what's one small thing I can do to move away from some of that fear and concern? Does that kind of line up with how you would think about just another practical way of getting underneath it?
I love it. I'm obsessed with that. That's exactly it. Because, right, by the way, I've seen studies where as high as 98% of adults don't identify as a creative person,
Yeah.
which is heartbreaking because the truth is it's
Yeah.
100%. So you get somebody who's like, oh, I'm not creative. That's not what I do. And I'm saying, they say, oh, do you have kids? Oh, yeah, I have 3 kids. Oh, how did you raise the kids? Show me the operating manual that you got when you delivered your child. What do you mean? Well, no, you weren't just following the rules. Where was the process when you made a judgment call in real time if you should, give the kid a harsh punishment or a different approach? How did you help them think through some of their challenges when they were in middle school? And they're like, oh, and they light up and tell you all these things. I'm like, oh, weird. What you're describing is a creative act. Every one of those is a
Mm,
creative act. And so a lot of it is just expanding our definition of what creativity is. Back to your point, it's like, what is it? Well, it's envisioning something that doesn't yet exist and applying it in the real world. And that's
mhm.
that's what parents do, every one of them. That's what trial lawyers do. That's what doctors do. That's what F1 pit crews do. And that's what you and I do every day.
Yeah. It brings me back to, um, the book that you were so kind to endorse, my new book, Human Capital Investment Strategy. You, in this amazing endorsement, you said, "This allows us to unleash the transformation and creativity that comes from cultivating a people positive approach to leadership," which I absolutely love. When we so relating those things, when you think about how to unleash that people positive approach and cultivate creativity, we've talked about psychological safety, which is huge, or whatever you want to call it, right? Create a safe environment where people feel that they can express things that aren't necessarily same. How else do you coach leaders and executives on, even from who they're selecting and how they're thinking about building teams? It seems to me that it starts really at jump when you're building the people around you, that you're encouraging them to step outside the protocols that they naturally fall within.
Uh, there's a couple inherent questions there. One I'll just touch on quickly is recruiting.
Yeah.
People often ask me, "What do you have any good tricks to recruit creative people?" I say, "I do. I'm so glad you asked me that question." Like, "Oh, what is it? What's the trick?" I go, "Hire humans."
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. You can have the person that shows up in the most creative way and the person that shows up in the least creative way, and you put them in the different organizations, you flip-flop those organizations, the person you thought would never create anything becomes a wildly incredible creator. In other words, that's inside all of us. The question is how is it showing up? How is it released or kept within? So just hire people. Don't recruit for creativity. Instead, spend your energy setting the conditions and building a culture that enables creativity and that unlocks it.
Yeah.
Some of it gets into rewards and punishments, and I don't mean that like in a childhood kind of way, or no one's getting slapped or anything. But in any social setting, business or otherwise, there are rewards and punishment. Sometimes it's positive feedback as a reward. Sometimes a punishment is something is just a sort of a snarly glance. But human beings we respond to that. One of the things, so I play jazz music. I'm very passionate about this, and
Yeah.
jazz is like this live art form where you're creating together. It's a state of flow, but it's a state of co-flow. That there's collaborative creativity. And I don't know a setting on the planet like that. You're making up 90% of the notes as you go. It's like I said, we're having a conversation. We're not reading a script. That's basically
Right.
what jazz is, but with instruments. And I would say that jazz musicians are no more inherently creative or less creative than anybody else. But the cultural dynamics of a jazz combo supports creative output. In other words, back to rewards and punishments. If I go out with my jazz guys and we go play a gig and I play it really safe and I do the obvious thing that I've always done before and all that kind of stuff, I don't get fired, but like no one's you don't get any applause. So no
Mhm.
rewards on it. Maybe you don't get hired again because they want someone who's going to push a little bit more. On the other hand, if I go out on a creative limb and let's say I screw something up. There's an old line in jazz: if you play a bad note, just play it twice more and call it art. I thought this is kind of funny.
I love
But
that.
but but, like, your fellow musicians are there rooting for you to take risks, and when you stumble, they'll get you back. Like, if I lose my place because 'cause I'm taking something risky, someone else will step in and, like, anchor where I need to go, so it helps me get back in place. And so, again, we think of a jazz musician as, like, there's someone born with, like, this incredible, effusive creativity. I would, again, suggest that it's the cultural dynamics of a jazz group, of a jazz culture that fuels that creative output, and if you put that same culture in place in a business setting, those people will be just as creative as a jazz musician.
Gosh, I wanna double down on what you just said and sort of say it back, because that to me is number 1, it creates this imagery, right? I happen to love jazz. I can remember in my younger years, I would say, "I don't get it. It's like a bunch of people playing different music." Sort of to a point, but it's not, it's the inflow part. That's the connection, and I love using that, and I get that that's your life, and you've played, thousands of shows and what have you, but for me, who's not a musician, to think about that everybody's sort of taking their lane and being creative and staying in flow with everyone else, but you're encouraged. And this idea that I love what you said about if I just played it safe and sort of played the standard, people aren't real excited about that. It's like, okay, that was safe. It's when you take the risk, when you kind of go out there that A, they've got your back, B, they're applauding you. Um, yeah, if cultures could be built, team cultures could be built that way. And it starts at the top, obviously, which I know you talk about. Um, that's fascinating to me. I think that that really gives me a whole imagery about where to show up. So you sort of anticipated a question I was going to ask, but I related to that. When was that spark for you that because I believe that you've been playing jazz since you were quite young, is that right?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and so business as it stands today came later in life. At what point was it for you that there was sort of the thought or the epiphany that there is such a connection here?
Yeah, so I started my first company at 20 years old. So I'm 55 now, so it's 35 years ago, and I didn't know anything about business. I'd never taken a business class. I was never working a job. I was 20 years old. And the one thing I knew was jazz. And in jazz, you just kind of figure stuff out. It's situational awareness and active listening, responding quickly to changing conditions, bouncing back when things don't go right, all that kind of stuff. And so jazz became this instant teacher for me because I had this idea to start a little company and selling computers or whatever. And I actually applied the jazz thinking, not the business thinking. And I found that that was a wild enabler of progress. By the way, I made tons of mistakes. It wasn't like a huge outcome or anything. But I realized that being a good entrepreneur is actually the same thing as being a good jazz musician. And to
Mm,
me, it's the ultimate training ground. And so it's funny if you ask me what I do today, because I do a number of weird things. I write books, I do public speaking, I run a venture capital fund, a bunch of other businesses. I would say I'm a jazz musician. And I don't say like in a rehearsed kind of cheesy way, like I mean it at my heart. Sometimes I do that while playing music with instruments. Sometimes I do that when I'm advising a startup. Sometimes I do that when I'm making an investment decision. But I actually wake up in the morning and I just play jazz all day. That's the same thing that I do. And another way to say that is it's part of who I am, obviously, but it's more like this creative co-flow state where I'm just trying to, bob and weave and adjust and create value as
yeah.
we go.
Wow. My daughter's a singer and songwriter, and she just went back into the workforce after being staying home raising kiddos. Um, and it's so fascinating. I'm so excited to have this conversation with her because it's how can she take what she knows of that musical talent. But the other thing is for the person listening, I really want to highlight this notion of I trust that there's at least one person listening saying, gosh, I just never thought of myself as a creative. But taking that time to really think about where you show up and how you do the things you do, not in a structured A to Z, always take the same, pathway, and then really articulating what that is and how do you apply that from a creative perspective. Um, I think is fascinating. I think that's a great challenge for the person listening, and the idea, the recruiting, which I love, is if you want creative people, hire a human, right? Which gets full circle sort of back to our point about this AI technology and people. The bottom line is we're going to coexist, we're going to be coworkers. They're going to augment things that don't allow us to live into the top of our talent or top of our creativity in this case. Um, so they'll augment those things so that we can do that which is uniquely human.
That's it.
Yeah.
You said it perfectly.
Love it. I love it so much. One of the things that I always want to get advice from our guest for the person listening is one thing they should start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. What would you say to that?
Well, of course, I'd be able to give a little bit more thoughtful input if it was a person, not all people listening, because I don't know
Right.
everybody, and because that
Yeah.
may be different from person to person. But if I had to zoom out, and generally thinking, I think one thing, based on our conversation, I'd say you start doing is, I'd say just start with an identity shift.
Mhm.
which is I am an accountant or I am a lawyer or I am a salesperson or whatever. I'm also an artist. I am an artist. Artists don't need to wear berets and be smug and drink fancy Chardonnay. Artists are people that create things. I'm an artist. It doesn't mean I paint, like, so you're an
Right.
artist. Let's be an
Yeah.
artist. And so to me, there's room for artistry. That's another way of saying creativity in everything that we do. So I think the first notion is like start thinking of yourself in a way that I'm a creative force, that I have the creative capacity to do. You may have to develop some skills. Nothing wrong with that. I couldn't play fancy arpeggios the day I picked up a guitar, but that's a skill. You learn the skill. But the underlying thing is natural creative flow, which we all have, period, full stop. I am an artist.
Mm.
Stop doing, I think maybe, and there's a number of things that I see people do, stop letting fear carry the day. Stop, um, stop overpaying for certainty. Like I think we sometimes make choices that we give up 90% of the upside because we're just so scared of stuff. I think stop doing would be stop accepting the world exactly as it is at face value. Again, I'm not saying take it to the extreme. I'm not saying like go, light a building on fire. Like, of course
Sure.
not. But
Yeah.
there's a policy. People are like, well, that's the policy. Like, I'm like, well, what if it wasn't the policy? What would a new policy look like? If that policy was gone, what would you write the same policy now? So
Yeah.
I think it's just the notion that you mentioned curiosity earlier, but questioning things and as opposed to just accepting them with blind faith.
Mhm.
And then the last one was do more of.
Continue. Yeah,
Oh,
continue.
what do you continue? Yeah. I would say continue the creative force that you already are while recognizing that you're doing it.
Yeah.
I've met people who are grumpy and their arms are folded and they will swear to me up and down they're not creative. And I do what you did in that 7 minute suggestion, which is brilliant, by the way. Hey, tell me where this shows up in your life. Have you ever done this? Tell me a time about that. And all of a sudden they're like telling me all these things. I'm like, oh, so in other words, you're like, oh, the aha moment. And so I'm not even asking people to like go create a statue, none of that. Just start doing more of, continue doing what you're already doing as a creative force. The only shift is recognize, there it is. There it is. I see
Mm.
you. I see it. There
Yeah.
it is. And then you start to think, "Well, actually, that's who I am. That's part of what I do. Regardless of role, position, title, age, none of that doesn't matter. We're all a creative force.
Incredible. And when in a world where we all showed up and we're tapped into our creativity, what does that look like? Where's the bottom line impact both to the person and to communities and to businesses?
Well, as mentioned, if you I don't know of things in life that are more inherently rewarding as the expression of creativity. I play music. I don't work music. I play music. And you think about the element of play. That means there's inherent value. You're not just doing it as a means to an end.
Mhm.
By the way, I think we should remove the word work altogether. Why not have a workforce, a play force instead of a workforce? How about you play through a problem instead of work through a problem? How about, hey, Tia, my wife, hey, Tia, I'm going out to play today instead of out to work today. Why not? Like,
Right.
that's kind of cool. But so I think that there's an intrinsic element that's undeniable. We've all experienced it. You have this creative moment, time bends, and you're like in it, and it's cool. But externally, think about this: every advancement in humanity started with a creative spark. Democracy. Oh, that's a creative idea. That didn't exist before someone thought about it. You know, um, a kayak. Oh, that's cool. Let's
Mhm.
figure that out. The wheel, on and on. The fire. And so essentially, what when you or literacy or the printing press or penicillin. So you think about the things that have fundamentally shaped our being and as humanity. Someone had to think, oh, what about the internet? That's a cool idea. What about AI? Like it was all born from a spark of human creativity. And when you think about the problems in this world, for which there are many, from racial divisiveness to environmental challenges to socioeconomic disparity, and. The only way problems have ever been solved in the past has been through creativity, and the way they'll be solved going forward is through creativity.
Yeah.
So if you think about, we all have cravings to a degree. That's not a negative thing, but like we crave maybe better business outcomes, or we crave more income for our families, or we crave environmental, betterment. Any craving that we have on this planet, how do you solve it? Go right back to creativity. So what's the benefit? This is not some squishy, nice to have kind of thing. If you ask me like, how do I get ahead of my career? That. How do I solve a problem with my neighbors who are fighting? Yeah, let's find a creative solution. So to me, creativity is the underpinning. It's like the molecular DNA module of solving problems and seizing opportunities. And so it's such a beautiful double win because we manifest better stuff externally and we
Mhm.
realize better stuff internally.
Yeah. And to that point, on its surface, somebody could easily diminish it as creativity, it's soft, it's this, it's that. But to your excellent point and evidence and history. Um, all everything that we have evolved and will continue long after we're here will be a spark of some creative person or people together that come up with a solution. So, so beautifully said. This has been amazing. And if the person listening isn't inspired, then I don't know what they need to go do their 7-minute pivot and find their creativity, because you have literally changed my perspective. I can't wait to go talk to both of my kids who both fancy themselves as creatives. And, I've been the corporate mom, so I'm going to go let them know that I'm also equally creative, just in different ways.
Well,
That'll be
that's you are 100%. And the other thing, dude, I'm a dad. I have 4 kiddos, and I love them. And so I think often like, how do I prepare them for the future? As all
yeah.
parents do. And you mentioned hard skills and soft skills. There's been a complete flip flop. In
Yes,
the past, soft skills, I don't like that term, but call that optional, and hard skills were like, more required. The hard skills of yesterday, if you just keep the hard soft thing, are the soft skills of today and vice versa. Because the hard skills were analytical thinking, precision, calculation, all that kind of stuff. You know who's the best in the world at that? AI. Period. No human's gonna be better than that. Just
that's
not.
right. That's
No, I
right.
can't process data faster than AI. Never can, never will. However, so those are the hard skills of the past, which are all now automated, or if they haven't yet, they will be. What's gonna not be automated? The soft skills of the past, which become the most important skills of the future, which is exactly what
Absolutely.
we've talked about today.
Absolutely. And I would offer that generally and through statistics, women have had an advantage in leaning into more openly a lot of that empathy, compassion, et cetera. I think the new generations of men are definitely getting comfortable in that space. But the women who I coach and talk to that worry about being replaced, et cetera, it's like you kind of have a head start. Let's lean into those things that come so naturally and add, based on our conversation, this idea of understand where your creativity shows up and unleash that. Yeah, I love it.
That's exactly it.
Josh, this was such a pleasure and provocative in all the right ways. I'm so grateful for your time and for your endorsement of human capital investment strategy. Everything you talk about lines up philosophically with where that book is going. And so, as we close out this episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel, I want to let you know that we were really intentional about dropping this episode. I know we don't normally talk about time bound things on the podcast. We were really intentional about dropping this episode with Josh Linkner on publication week. So the book is live and well today when this podcast drops. And I want to offer you something really special. For those of you who are tuning in this week for this particular episode, from February 3rd to February 6th, 2026, if you go on Amazon and purchase your copy of Human Capital Investment Strategy, all you have to do is send me a quick email to Cynthia at cynthiabenson-mercer.com. It's in the show notes. Just write purchased, and I'm going to send you the guide that breaks down all the tools and resources that are also in the book. So it's a really handy PDF. It's going to be very useful for you. Just put purchased in the email to Cynthia at cynthiabenson-mercer.com. Grab your copy of Human Capital Investment Strategy this week. It's live. And thank you so much for tuning in. You've got this. Congratulations on choosing to invest in yourself. I know your time is precious. Thank you for spending it here with me. I believe in helping you look up, step forward, and fully realizing your potential. If today's conversation resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you know someone who would benefit, please share this episode with them. Let's stay connected. Visit me at dr-cynthia.com, and you can find me on all the socials at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. Until next time, remember, boldly start working on your future today.